The neighborhood of Brookside was the kind of place people chose for peace. Wide streets lined with trimmed hedges, children playing on sidewalks, and quiet evenings where porch lights glowed like lanterns of safety. Among the homeowners was Officer Richard Kane, a man who had lived there for nearly 2 decades. To most residents, he was the embodiment of stability, a police officer, a father of 2 teenagers, and a husband who never missed a Sunday at church. He carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. His presence seemed reassuring to those who believed in the image of law and order. Yet beneath that polished exterior was a reputation that carried unease. In the precinct, Richard was known for his short temper, his rigid views, and the way he treated certain suspects differently from others. Black residents in particular often complained of his heavy-handedness, but their words never gained traction against the uniform he wore. Inside his own home, Richard maintained the same cold authority. His wife Ellen accepted his distance as part of their marriage, telling herself that his stress came from the job. Their children obeyed him without question, more out of fear than love. Everything in Richard's life was built on control of his image, his career, and his household. That control began to feel threatened the moment Maya Thompson moved into the modest rental house next door. She was 22, young and full of determination, starting fresh after years of hardship. Maya had grown up in a city where opportunities were scarce, but she carried herself with resilience. To her, Brookside was a stepping stone toward a better life, a place where she could save money and chase the nursing degree she dreamed of. The first time Richard noticed her was on a warm afternoon. She was carrying boxes into her new home, her arms trembling under the weight. From his porch he watched, his expression unreadable. He didn't offer help right away. Instead, he observed, taking in the details, the way she tied her hair back quickly with a scrunchie, the soft laugh she gave when she dropped a box, the independence in her movements. Something stirred in him that he couldn't admit, not even to himself. Within days, Richard found excuses to cross paths with her. A broken mailbox became a reason to knock on her door. A neighborhood watch reminder turned into small talk. He began presenting himself as the helpful neighbor, the man who could keep her safe in a new town. Maya accepted the gestures politely, not suspecting the depth of his interest. After all, he was a cop, her neighbor, someone who seemed trustworthy on the surface. For the first time in years, Richard felt alive in ways his stale marriage never gave him. But it wasn't love. It was possession. He saw Maya not as a woman with dreams, but as someone he could mold, someone vulnerable to his authority. The mask of the respectable officer remained firmly in place, but behind it, a dangerous obsession was taking root. Maya's life in Brookside began with quiet routines. She worked double shifts at the diner on the edge of town, returned home exhausted, and spent her evenings studying textbooks borrowed from the library. She had no family nearby and few friends in the neighborhood, but she was used to solitude. Moving to this quiet suburb had been her chance to escape the chaos she grew up around, and she promised herself she would stay focused. No matter how lonely the nights became, Richard Kane, however, had no intention of remaining a distant neighbor. His interest grew with every encounter. At first, he seemed like a helpful figure, offering to mow the strip of grass between their houses, showing up at the diner for coffee during her shifts, and asking about her safety in the new neighborhood. He always positioned himself as a protector, someone she could lean on in a place where she knew no one. Maya wasn't naive. She noticed his attentiveness, but she convinced herself it was harmless. After all, he was older, married, and a police officer. She had no reason to believe his kindness carried danger. The line between neighborly gestures and manipulation blurred quickly. Richard began finding reasons to linger longer at her house. A sudden power outage had him knocking on her door, flashlight in hand, insisting she shouldn't sit alone in the dark. A flat tire on her old car became an opportunity for him to crouch in her driveway, fixing it as if it were his responsibility. Every act of generosity tied her more tightly to him, even as she tried to keep her independence intact. When the affair began, it was not with romance, but with pressure. Richard's authority carried weight that Maya felt she couldn't resist. He framed himself as someone who understood her struggles, reminding her of all the times he had helped her since she moved in. At first, she tried to distance herself, keeping conversations short and her doors locked. But Richard's persistence was relentless. He would appear without warning, knock until she answered, and weave his way into her space. Eventually, she stopped fighting his presence, convincing herself it was easier to let him in than to resist. Their secret relationship was built on an uneasy balance of fear and dependency. Richard demanded her time, questioned where she went, and grew suspicious of every male voice he heard on her phone. He treated her less like a partner and more like property. Maya knew it wasn't love, but a strange combination of intimidation and the fleeting comfort of not being completely alone. The secrecy consumed her, and she began living with a constant undercurrent of anxiety. Neighbors noticed subtle shifts. Richard's patrol car was often parked outside her home late at night. Lights glowed in her living room at hours when she used to be asleep. Whispers spread at backyard barbecues and over fences, but no one dared ask questions openly. Who would confront a police officer with such influence in town? For Richard, the affair became his obsession. He convinced himself he was entitled to her, even while maintaining his role as husband and father just a few feet away in the house he shared with Ellen. In his mind, he was untouchable, a man above suspicion. For Maya, however, every day felt like a tightening trap. What she had thought would be a new beginning in a quiet town was quickly transforming into a dangerous secret she could neither escape nor expose. Ellen Kane had been married to Richard for over 20 years, and in that time she had grown accustomed to his moods, his silences, and his temper. She had long ago stopped expecting tenderness, settling instead for the predictability of their routine. But one thing Ellen knew for certain was her husband's patterns, the rhythm of his days and nights, the subtle changes in his behavior. When those patterns shifted, she noticed. At first, it was the simplest of things, Richard coming home later than usual, the faint smell of cigarette smoke on his uniform even though he never smoked, the way he avoided her eyes when she asked casual questions. She tucked those suspicions away quietly, unwilling to stir conflict until she had more than a feeling. The real confirmation came in the form of small details that seemed harmless on their own. A shirt missing from the laundry, gas receipts from a part of town Richard never visited, and the way his phone was suddenly guarded like a weapon. Ellen was not naive. She had seen friends discover their husbands' affairs before. But what unsettled her most was not the betrayal itself. It was the secrecy. The sense that Richard was hiding something that ran deeper than infidelity. Her quiet investigation led her to watch him more closely. She noticed his gaze linger toward the rental house next door. She remembered the new tenant, the young woman who had moved in with little more than a few boxes. Ellen had only spoken to Maya once in passing, exchanging polite greetings, but the idea that Richard could be involved with someone so young gnawed at her. As the weeks went on, she became convinced. The late-night patrol car in the driveway, the unexplained absences, and the subtle tension in her husband's voice whenever Maya's name came up, it all aligned in ways she could not ignore. Ellen's discovery weighed heavily on her. She considered confronting Maya, but shame and anger held her back. Instead, she chose to confront Richard directly. Her words were sharp but controlled, asking if he thought she was blind to the changes, if he believed she couldn't see what was happening next door. Richard's reaction was not guilt but rage. He denied at first, then lashed out, his paranoia twisting her questions into accusations of betrayal. For the first time, Ellen realized she wasn't speaking to a man caught in weakness, but to someone consumed by fear of exposure. For Richard, the stakes were far higher than a broken marriage. His entire identity rested on the image of a respectable officer and family man. To be revealed as unfaithful would be damaging, but to be known as the man secretly involved with a young black woman would destroy everything he had built. His reputation, his career, and the authority he held over others would collapse instantly. The racism that had shaped his public persona now threatened to unravel him from within. The more Ellen pressed, the more unstable Richard became. He grew harsher at home, retreating into silence one moment and erupting in anger the next. With Maya, his behavior shifted as well. He began tightening his grip on her, questioning her loyalty, convinced she might betray him. What had started as a secret affair was no longer just hidden passion. It was a dangerous secret that, if uncovered, could end his career and his carefully constructed life. Richard was determined to keep it buried, even if it meant silencing those who threatened to expose him. The night was heavy with humidity, the kind that clung to skin and made the air feel suffocating. Richard Kane had been pacing his living room for hours, his mind unraveling under the weight of fear. That morning, he had found the note in his mailbox, simple words scribbled in black ink that carried the power to destroy him. "Everyone will know your secret soon." His heart had pounded as he read it, and for the rest of the day, paranoia followed him like a shadow. He convinced himself that Maya had betrayed him, that she had grown tired of his control and was ready to expose the truth. The thought consumed him until reason gave way to obsession. He drove his patrol car to her house just after sunset, his headlights cutting through the quiet street. Neighbors later said they saw him step out quickly, shoulders tense, as if he had already decided what he was about to do. He didn't knock. Gently this time. He pounded on Maya's door until she opened it. What followed was chaos behind closed walls. The two voices rose, echoing through the thin windows, sharp and heated. Some neighbors admitted later that they heard shouting but dismissed it as a personal argument, unwilling to get involved. After all, it was Officer Kane's voice, and no one wanted to cross him. Inside, Richard's anger was volcanic. He demanded answers, accused her of betraying him, pressed her with questions she could not answer. Maya's denials only fueled his rage. To him, every word she spoke sounded like a lie. Every glance toward the door looked like an attempt to run. In his mind, she wasn't the woman he desired, but the enemy who could bring his world crashing down. Fear and desperation twisted into violence. As the argument escalated, objects were knocked over, a chair toppled, and a lamp shattered against the floor. Maya's voice carried a mix of terror and defiance, but it was drowned out by Richard's fury. The fight reached its peak in an instant that changed everything. A gunshot rang out, loud and final, tearing through the humid night. The noise jolted the neighborhood, startling families who had been preparing for bed. But silence followed just as quickly, an eerie stillness that settled over the street. It wasn't until hours later that a worried neighbor called the police, reporting strange noises and the sound of glass breaking. When officers arrived, they found Maya lying lifeless in her living room, a single bullet wound ending the life she had been fighting so hard to rebuild. The scene was chaotic but revealing. Overturned furniture, signs of a violent struggle, and a lingering sense of fear trapped in the air. Richard was gone. His patrol car had vanished from the street, along with his service weapon. To investigators, the trail was clear. The respected officer had become the suspect. The same man who once represented authority now stood accused of taking the life of the young woman he had secretly controlled. For the town, the revelation was both shocking and inevitable. Whispers of suspicion hardened into a chilling truth. What lingered most was the unanswered question of the note in the mailbox. Who had written it? Was it truly Maya, or someone else who had seen too much? And if it wasn't her, then why had Richard been so quick to assume betrayal? Those questions would haunt the investigation, casting doubt and deepening the mystery. All that was certain was that one life had ended, another had disappeared, and the suburb of Brookside would never be the same again. The morning after Maya's death, Brookside woke to flashing lights and sirens. News traveled quickly in the Yao, quiet suburb, and within hours the story had spread beyond the neighborhood. The young woman next door was dead, and the man missing was none other than Officer Richard Kane. The irony was too sharp to ignore. The same man who had worn a badge of authority was now a fugitive. His absence confirmed suspicions, and the town buzzed with theories about what had really happened that night. Investigators wasted no time. The scene inside Maya's house left little room for doubt. The broken furniture, the shattered lamp, the signs of a struggle, it all pointed to a violent confrontation. Witness statements matched the timeline, with several neighbors recalling Richard's car parked outside long after midnight. Yet despite the clear direction of the case, Richard himself had vanished without a trace. His phone was powered off, his accounts inactive, and no one had seen him since the night of the shooting. As detectives dug deeper, the double life he had led began to unravel in public. Ellen, his wife, sat down with investigators and revealed what she had long suspected. She told them about the late nights, the missing shirts, and the way he had grown obsessed with their young neighbor. Her testimony painted a picture of a man consumed not by love but by control, someone willing to risk everything to keep his secrets buried. Friends of Maya added to the portrait, describing how she had felt uneasy in the weeks leading up to her death, how she had admitted feeling trapped by the attention she couldn't escape. Piece by piece, the image of Richard Kane shifted from respected officer to dangerous predator. The media seized on the story, and soon it was national news. Headlines framed it as the fall of a cop who had once represented order, but had instead brought chaos to his own community. Reporters highlighted his history of complaints from black residents, his reputation for heavy-handed policing, and the chilling hypocrisy of his hidden affair with a young black woman. The story struck a nerve, sparking debates about abuse of power, racism, and the dark truths that could hide behind the authority of a badge. Weeks passed, and the manhunt for Richard expanded. State lines were crossed, tips poured in, and sightings were reported in diners, gas stations, and rest stops, but none led to his capture. The break came when his patrol car was discovered abandoned near a remote lake 2 towns over. Inside, officers found his neatly folded uniform, badge, and wedding ring placed together on the passenger seat. But Richard himself was gone. Search. Teams combed the woods and dragged the waters, yet no body was ever recovered. The lack of closure left the case in limbo. Some believed he had drowned in the lake, choosing death over disgrace. Others were convinced he had staged his disappearance, slipping into a new identity somewhere far from Brookside. For Ellen and her children, the absence brought no peace, only questions without answers. For Maya's family, justice felt incomplete, her story overshadowed by the man who had stolen her life. In the end, what began as whispers of suspicion in a quiet neighborhood became a haunting mystery that refused to fade. Richard Kane's name lingered in headlines and unsolved case files, and in the uneasy memories of Brookside residents who once trusted him. The officer who demanded control had lost it all, leaving behind only destruction, scandal, and a story that blurred the line between authority and corruption.